So this webinar, this is going to be about aids, how to make the horse more responsive to your aids. We're going to talk about the seat. We're going to talk about some groundwork. And the material that I've got in this webinar is sort of exclusive from the new book, which is Master Dressage Basics. And that's the Kindle book that's going to be coming out probably mid-July now. That will be approximately 10,000 to 15,000 words, so not as big as the other book, but it's going to be broken down into 10 lessons. So some of the material here is from one and a half, I guess, of the lessons in that book. So any feedback about it will be great. So we'll also go and have a look at the influence of the seat as well. I've got some really great links for you to go and have a watch of some videos. So that will really help make it clear in your mind what the seat should be doing and perhaps what the seat shouldn't be doing. And we've got a couple of little exercises that we can do later on as well. I will make these slides available to the members. They won't be going out to the public, because it contains some of the ideas that I'm going to be using for the ebook. So let's get started on the idea of aids. One of the phrases Mary used in her book was the horse moves away from any given stimulus. So we can start with that as the basis for all of the aids. So in this picture here, despite Millie's leg being a bit far back and the girth being a bit far forward actually, and the angle, what she's showing in the left photograph, and you'll have seen this if you've read the book, is correct bend and incorrect bend. But what we actually see here is her on the photograph on the right putting more left thigh on, more left leg on, more left rein on, and it's actually pushing the horse out to the outside. The horse, with the weight on the inside rein, the horse gives to that weight. She moves her shoulder away from the thigh and the lower leg. So horses move away from any given stimulus. So in another picture here that I've done is kind of a similar thing. If you look at the picture on the left, what you've got here is a closed left thigh, left leg on, all the way over to the left, and the horse is actually bulging out and falling out through its shoulder out to the right. And, her left seat bone's down, and all the kind of push is happening on the left side, and the horse moves away from that given stimulus. So, feel free to, join in on the chat. You just click the chat button at the top. But, and you probably know the answer already if you've read the book, but whose responsibility is it to keep the horse going? It's one of my favorite questions to ask in a lesson, especially with new pupils, as inevitably they say it's their responsibility. But it's the horse's responsibility to keep doing what you last told it to do. And that means if you use your leg and the horse increases its impulsion, it should continue trotting along at that level of impulsion until you tell it to do something different. There are lots of words used to describe how to apply the leg. I'm sure you've heard them all before: squeeze, push, kick. Well, actually, that's probably about the range of it. Actually, if anyone's heard any more interesting ones, they can type it up in the chat. The leg should be a short, clear aid with a release. So it means that let's take it down to the level of a squeeze. When somebody says squeeze, to the normal person, that means press in as if you're trying to squeeze the sausage meat out of the horse or something. Whereas, a skilled rider with the calf against the horse's side and is toned will make a very sort of short contraction in with the legs, and that is what an aid is. It's short and clear. Now, when you go to give a stronger aid, then the other side of that aid is a kick. So the leg rebounds away and bangs and comes off again. It's really important for there to be a release. A lot of people squeeze and they don't let go, and you need to be able to have a release so that it's a clear signal, which doesn't last for any period of time. The only way to make the horse sensitive is to give lighter and lighter aids and not have this constant pressure on. Oh, hi, viewer 14. You are late to join. So the question was, whose responsibility is it to keep the horse going? So my view in this situation, and I think Pat Pirelli has the same view as well, is that one of the horse's responsibilities is to keep doing what he was last told to do. So we were talking about how to apply the leg, and you can watch this again if you come in late and that kind of thing. So the leg aid is always short and clear, and there is a release. Now let me just think if there's anything else I wanted to say about how you're applying the leg. So you're getting ahead of yourself, you were 14. So what are the consequences when the horse doesn't respond to your leg? Now, I've heard a lot about the stick backs up the leg, and what I don't want you to think is that the stick is a stronger version of your leg, because it's not really a stronger version of your leg. The stick is the consequence for the horse ignoring your leg. So now some horses you only have to give a very small consequence to when they ignore your leg, and a tap with the schooling whip, and off they go again, and everything's fine. So I just want to get that bit clear, that the stick or tap with the stick is a consequence of the horse not listening to your leg. It isn't a stronger leg aid or anything like that. So it's a definite, hey, you listen to me, my leg means business. So I would use my leg once, and if it doesn't happen, I use it again with a tap with the stick. What are our responsibilities? Exactly, viewer 14. So that's one of them. So I'll go through my list. Our responsibilities are, first of all, that when the horse responds, we go with the movement of the horse. We don't get left behind. We apply enough tone so as the horse accelerates, our seat doesn't go backwards. We don't end up pulling on the reins or getting left behind in any way. So it's really important that you apply the leg, the horse responds, and you're there with the horse. It's our responsibility as well to make sure that we only ever use our leg when we mean to do something. And that's really, really important. And I'm not sure if I said it in the book. Maybe I did. I can't remember all the words. So I often say to pupils when they're riding, especially pupils that use a lot of leg, I will say to them, okay, so you're not allowed to move your leg at all until I say. And if you use your leg and the horse doesn't respond, you need to apply a consequence. So in that way, we kind of get the rider to make much more conscious choice about their leg. But you really, really do have to control, even in rising trot, if your leg moves a little bit, you've got to really work on that. That you know exactly when you're using your leg, exactly the response you want from using your leg, and what the consequence is if that doesn't happen. And the stuck on a 3. So there's a guy I'm going to introduce to you later on, and you can have a look at his work online, and I'll send you via email the link for this. He says that humans often get stuck on a 3. So, for instance, let's take 0 as no pressure, and 5 being the horse is about to leap off the edge of a cliff and we have to stop it, and that's the amount of pressure you're going to apply to try and stop it. Okay? Most riders get stuck on a 3. So they use their leg aid, and they always use that strength of leg aid. That's what they always use. So it's really important that you think about the strength of the aid that you're applying, because we cannot make the horse more responsive to our legs by continually applying the same pressure. And it's just our tendency as humans to go ahead and, use the same force of the leg, or use the same force of the same thing applies to the reins. We tend to get stuck on a 3. So it's really important that you're able to go from a 1, very light pressure, and you're willing to escalate it to a 5, and a 5 might be using the stick quite hard to get the horse to realize he has to move forwards. And as I said, some horses, you tap them and they go, yeah, I don't care. And you might have to escalate it a little bit more for them to actually take notice of your consequence and take you seriously. So getting a horse to be more sensitive to your aid is a combination of knowing whose responsibility it is for the various pieces. The horse's responsibility is that he keeps doing what you last told him to do. Your responsibility is you need to provide enough tone to stay up with the horse as he accelerates, not to land heavily in his back when he does accelerate or pull on the reins or anything like that. And that may sound like a very novice-y thing, landing a bit heavy in the saddle or pulling on the reins, but this happens in a very subtle way, even for more advanced riders. So, I actually, if I want to accelerate, I'll provide a little bit more push from the back of my body up to the front of my body, and from the front of my body up towards my hands, and I'll feel like I'm pushing my hands forward as if against an invisible force. I don't shove my hands forwards, it's just that feeling that my hands want to push forwards. And then the horse, and actually when you come to do medium trot or lengthened strides, that becomes really important as well. And the other aspect is making sure that you don't get stuck on a 3. So you don't get stuck kicking or always using the same pressure and so on. Does anyone have any questions about that? I'm just going to quickly go on to rein aids. Has anyone got any questions about leg aids? Okay, so I'm just going to move on anyway. So now this is a really quite tough subject, but let me say that the 3 applies to the rein aids as well. So it's very important you don't get stuck hanging onto the reins or the horse hanging onto you. If I have a horse that's heavy in the hand, it's usually because it's on the forehand, or it has consistently been trained to maintain that level of pressure. So in the case of it being on the forehand, I can usually do something about that, and the horse becomes lighter in front. If the horse is leaning into the rein, I tend to work on its balance, and also I keep making little gives with my hands. So my hand kind of goes forward towards the mouth, makes a little loop in the rein, and then kind of comes back again every now and again, and it just kind of, it says to the horse, I'm not holding you up. The feel in the rein should be that the horse is reaching out to the rein and resting very gently onto the end of the rein. So there will be a small amount of weight in the rein, enough to keep the reins from going loopy. So, there should be some contact there. If there's no contact or it's super light, it's a bit worrying. It's kind of like perhaps the horse is contracting its neck away from the bit a little bit, or becoming behind the vertical, or some other thing where the horse is not happy maintaining the contact with the bit. If you're not pulling back, and your hands are in the right place, and the horse is balanced, then he ought to be able to maintain that contact. And the feel you get actually is, I'll do this with Tinker, the horse you saw in the book. When I push my hands forwards on her slowly, she just stretches to maintain that contact. I don't get any loops in my reins. She just sort of follows the length of the rein to the outline and kind of maintains the same pressure all the way through. And when I pick up the reins again, we have the same thing in reverse. She sort of maintains the pressure to that. And that's kind of come from a lot of training of teaching the horse to reach over its back and stretch into the rein and so on. And that actually is what consistent to contact means. That the horse keeps reached out onto the end of the rein. And that's a function of training. It's a function of how you ride, and it's also a function of muscle structure as well. A horse that isn't consistent to the contact often is a bit flat in the back and isn't really sort of connected through its back into the neck and then reached out onto the end of the rein. So for me, when I see a horse that isn't consistent to the contact, generally you can see it's a bit flat in the back, isn't reached out. And that, I think often people think that they have to fix the head, and actually it's usually the way the horse is using its body is the issue. I do, I've been taught by Mary a long time, and I very rarely go near anybody else. But I did spend a very long time, quite a number of years. Let me see how many years. 3-4 years being trained under the BHS system. So this isn't anything about the BHS, but it was the system I was underneath. And it was all about wiggling, sponging. If the horse didn't go round, it was resisting you, all that kind of stuff. And everything was kind of like head-centric. I do use my rein, but I kind of use my rein in the same way that I would use my leg. I do it in response to something specific, and it doesn't happen very often. And my hands are like 96% of the time doing nothing but being still. So the other percent of the time, they may be pushing forwards. I might be giving my hand. Or, for instance, let's say I want to turn. I'll be bringing if I want to turn to the inside, I'll be bringing my inside hand slightly out. And let's see, what else? And if the horse, kind of decides to go, oh, what's over there? Then I'll use my rein in the same way to bring the horse's head and neck back to the inside and to paying attention to me. But there isn't any kind of constant wiggling or sponging or flexing or anything like that, because, it all relies on what the length of rein you have is, and that the horse is lifting up over its back and reaching into the rein. Actually, in a way, we've kind of already covered turning, but be very careful when you turn that your hand doesn't kind of come in and across and cross the rein, or have too much backward pull in it. Because essentially, if you've got a lot of backward pull on your inside rein, then probably you have too much bend. Probably your horse has bent too much to the inside, and probably it's disappearing out through its outside shoulder. One of the things you'll see when I release the Kindle book, Master Dressage, The Basics, is for those that pre-order it, I'm actually doing something called Master Dressage Director's Cut. And for each of the individual lessons, I'm going to do a short video showing Millie doing some of the movements, performing some of the groundwork that I'm going to explain a little bit later in the webinar. And you'll be able to see some of this stuff in action. Halting, halting is, in terms of using the rein, is kind of a block. You're kind of, your shoulders come back, your fingers close around the rein, your elbows might come in, and you block. So it's, again, important that your hands don't kind of come backwards and in towards your stomach. Not only isn't it isn't right, but you end up pulling your hands in towards your stomach, your tummy pulls in, you'll tend to tip forwards, and once you hit your stomach, where else is there to go? But even shorten your reins up even more, or whatever. So halting is more of a block. And for those of you that have strong horses, don't worry, we've got some extra stuff a little bit later on which can kind of help solve that problem. And the same issue goes for, are you stuck on a 3 with the pressure that you've got on the reins? Are you halting with the same strength that you always halt with, or can you try and stop with a lighter aid? So that's something to think about. in terms of turning and steering the horse's shoulders and all that kind of thing, I'm going to send everyone a link later on. But Mary's starting a webinar series on Tuesday, 7 p.m. I think it is 6 or 7 p.m. I'll find out. And the first lecture is on understanding correct turning aids and balance through the shoulders. Which she'll go more into depth of, what leg to use, what thigh to use, which position you should be in, how you turn, what your hand should be doing, and so on, which focusing on that specific thing and being Mary as she is, she explains that extremely well. So let's talk about halt and go. When you want to come to a halt, there are two levels of aids being applied, or should I say 2 levels of psychology being applied here. The first is operative conditioning, which means how well has your horse been trained to stop from rein pressure. And then there's the kind of classical conditioning, which is the response that the horse has to your body. So in the classical conditioning, you can actually by the way, there is a video on this, but you can actually slow your seat bones down and actually stop your seat, and the horse will also respond to that. When I get on a horse that's very, very speedy, if I'm schooling it for somebody, it doesn't take long for the horse to start listening to my seat bones, and I get to the point where I'm walking the horse and the horse isn't walking me. If you're too loose in the saddle or too floppy, then your seat is essentially at the mercy of the horse. The horse walks at whatever speed it walks at, and your seat follows along, and guess what? All you've got is the pull on the rein to be able to make a change. So when I get to that section, you'll be able to go to that link and actually watch a video by Mary. She talks about how to sit really still, how to get control of tempo and walk and sitting trot and canter and so on. Okay. We've talked about the rein contact in the halt. So let's just talk about halt a little bit more. When you come into halt, I think a lot of people go into all kind of contortions. We've talked about how to block with the hands, but you should be thinking about what is it that you do. If you have a problem with your halt, you should be asking yourself, what is it you're doing differently in your body when you come to halt that doesn't happen previously. People do all kinds of things. They grow up tall, they hollow their back, they pull their tummy in, they tip forwards, they lean back. And in fact, the kind of perfect halt has you lined up vertically, coming into the halt, and you stay vertical. There's no distortion to your position as you come into the halt. And if you think about it, if you get left behind, you're kind of in a water ski where the horse can move out in front of you. And if you're too far forward, the horse kind of gets on the forehand and probably can't bring its hind legs underneath it. So remaining vertical is really important. But the question becomes, what do you change? Some people, for instance, pop up off the top of the saddle. So they start to halt and their butt tightens up and their top of the thigh tightens up and they kind of pop themselves up off the top of the saddle. Some riders lean back and grind their seat into the saddle, causing the horse's back to hollow. Okay, and walk on. So we've talked about the leg, but I haven't ever had a chance to ask Mary about this, but when I ask a horse to walk on, clearly you're gathering your reins up, but then what do? Do you just give the aid and expect the horse to go? If you just give the leg aid? For me, I find that results in a horse kind of either getting a shock and zooming off, or the horse doesn't respond very well, and then you end up having to give a consequence for the horse not responding to your aid. So, and I'm going to check this with Mary at some point, what I do is I take up my reins, I give a small press in with both of my legs, and then I give the aid to walk on. So the kind of press in with my both of my legs, lower legs, almost kind of starts the engine up and just warns the horse that I'm going to do something. And for me, that gives me much smoother transitions from halt to walk. The same applies for walk to canter. I will increase the push forward through my back of the body to the front, give a little squeeze, and then I'll give the leg aid to trot on. And in that way, the horse has had a little bit of warning. And I find when I do canter, I do something very similar. So my inside leg squeezes in a little bit, which kind of preps the horse, and then the outside leg goes back and asks for the canter. So there's always that invisible bit of preparation that nobody really sees, because it's just a sort of a firm pressure in. And of course, this does initially depend on how well you've trained your horse to listen to your leg, and how good you are at only using your leg when you mean to, and keeping it still. Excuse me while I grab a drink. So this is where I'm going to go into talking about groundwork. And this is actually the operant conditioning. This is the sort of stuff that you should be doing with your horse on the ground a lot. You should be training this into your horse a lot. Now, Andrew McLean has done some incredible work with groundwork and with horses, some very intelligent training methods. And what I find really great about his training methods is they emulate the aids that the rider has to give when they move on top of the horse, and they don't train the horse to follow the human, or to rely on the human doing something first before they do it. So, for instance, one of the great benefits of this training method is that all of our horses park. So, we're walking along, leading the horse, and if you want them to stop, they stop from a very light pressure on the rein, and I can continue walking forwards, and my horse just stays there. And I can chat to my friends, turn around, do this, that, and the other, and the horse just stays in place. And I mean, I think that's incredible that you can, and it's great for teaching the horses halts. They learn to stand still. It's fantastic. So let's have a look. Now, please forgive the pictures. These aren't very professionally done. Having had such a terrible week, I haven't had a chance to get my normal camera out and take the time. So the training position, by the way, the stick isn't part of the training position, but the training position is facing towards the horse. So you're actually initially always walking backwards when you're doing this. And I wanted to show here how the reins were being held. Poor Millie was kind of dragged in from her jumping lesson today and made to pose for these pictures. So what you can see is she's holding the end of the rein kind of over the four fingers like this. And then she's kind of got the rein near the bit coming down where the thumb is, and the other one coming round where the little finger is. So she's sort of holding both of them, and that's how she'd hold it if she was in the training position. And what that allows you to do is actually to take your hand. So once you've given the aid to stop, so you've applied a light bit of pressure to the rein, you can bring your hand away, and you've still got the rein in this hand, and it just allows you to easily let go of the rein. So you can then end up in this position. So let's just go over the basic for halting. And we'll actually start with this. So once the horse is walking forward and you wanted to halt, you're facing towards it, you'll apply pressure with the rein to get the horse to halt. And the important thing about applying the pressure with the rein is that you start at a 1. Hopefully you've all been on from the beginning, but 0 is no pressure, 1 is a very light pressure, and 5 is, you're trying to stop the horse taking off the edge of a cliff. So you start off with a 1, but you fairly rapidly escalate if the horse isn't listening. So don't stay on a 1 and get walked over, but don't yank. It's not a yank of the rein. It's very light, nothing happening, bit more, nothing happening, bit more, nothing happening, bit more. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's really important is as soon as the horse halts, you remain walking backwards. So imagine this, the horse is walking on, you're walking backwards, you apply some pressure with the rein, the horse halts, but you keep walking and you end up in this position. And that's the important, well, I think that's one of the biggest benefits of Andrew's training is that you teach the horse to stop and stay stopped no matter what the rider's doing. And imagine now we took Millie out of the scene, put her on top of the horse, and she asked the horse to halt. Well, now the horse doesn't need a human to know when to halt. You know, it's learning to halt directly from a light pressure on the rein. Now, before we do any work with the stick, so we'd use a schooling whip for this. Some schooling whips are better than others. You don't want anything too kind of boingy, something relatively stiff. And to get the horse to walk on, it just gets touched. By the way, can everyone see my mouse moving around on the screen here? So when I move my mouse around this sort of girth area, I don't know whether everyone can actually see that or not. Anyway, I'm moving my mouse where just behind the. Oh, you can. Cool. So when we give an aid for the horse to walk on, we touch just behind the girth, just where the rider's leg would be coming down to here and then forwards. But before we do any of that, and actually before we do any of the kind of work, we get the horse desensitized to the stick so that it has no fear of it. And isn't jumping around and can be relaxed and essentially, you know, you start off stroking the neck, work your way down the front legs, over its flanks, over its quarters, and you do that both sides. And it's really important to take time with this stage and get the horse to be sensitive, to be desensitive to the stick. You know, it's a tool, it's not a punishment. And we don't want it to see it that way. And even when you ride and you give a consequence to the horse generally doesn't see you waving the sort of stick around, and you know, it shouldn't be afraid of the stick anyway. On all of the horses I've trained, because I'm extremely careful about when I use my leg, what the result I want from my leg, and you know, that there is a consequence each time. I only have to use light leg aids, and if I want the horse to move on, if the horse doesn't respond to my leg, I just have to flick my wrist a tiny little bit, and the stick touches the horse, and it goes, oh yeah, sorry, forgot, and you know, off it goes. So, and by the way, that doesn't come from beating the living daylights out of it either. You know, that's just from being really clear about what I want and doing this groundwork as well, which is so important. So this is the desensitization part. It's extremely important. Please, you know, do that. And Millie's holding the reins in the same way as before, and looking a bit smarter and more professional. Okay. So this is at the point that you want the horse to walk on, and Millie's tapping it approximately where the leg would be. And when you tap, you'll make one tap. And if the horse doesn't move on, you tap a little bit harder and then a little bit harder, just like we did with the reins. You know, we never want to get stuck on a 3. We want to start off light and then rapidly increase the pressure until the horse moves on. You do not walk on so you do not start walking backwards until the horse walks. That's really important. We want the horse to respond to the pressure of the tapping on the side, not respond to you walking backwards. So I hope that kind of makes sense there. So it's tap, nothing happens. A bigger tap, nothing happens. A bigger tap, but you know, take your time in the increments. I mean, we're pretty sensitive people. Although I remember teaching one person this who sort of escalated. She didn't have very many gradients between light and you know, not so light, so we had to increase her sensitivity a bit. This photograph, so actually what you can see here is Millie holding the stick in kind of like a forehand position. You know, if you were playing tennis, you know, that would be for hitting forehand. And let's pose the question, okay, I've asked my horse to halt and I've started walking backwards, and my horse continues to walk forwards towards me. What do you do? Well, you move up to the horse and you do what Andrew calls deleting the step. So essentially, you ask the horse to step backwards a couple of steps, and you can see Millie's just gone a little bit backhand with the stick, and she's giving very light taps on the cannon bone to get the horse to step its legs backwards. So she makes, let's say the horse stepped forward a few steps, she deletes that and makes it step back a few steps. So gradually the horse learns to stay in place, and every time that the horse steps forwards, you delete the step, then walk backwards yourself again. So you're kind of testing that it will stay stood still, and the horse will learn that every time it tries to sort of move forwards towards you, it has to go back into place where it was. Now this doesn't end up with horses that go backwards away from you or anything like that. Tinker just stands, and you can see her in this picture. She's just stood still, and when you walk up to her, she stays still, and she's quite happy there. And so you might think deleting steps might cause the horse to walk back away from you, but it doesn't. And I think that kind of comes as well from the desensitization. And the same thing with the stick applies with the legs. Don't get stuck on a 3. Light tap should be enough to move the horse's legs back a couple of steps. And that is a whistle-stop tour of how to teach your horse to go forward from the lightest tap, because essentially you always start off light and you escalate until the horse moves forwards. And every time you want to go forwards, you start off light, and then only escalate if you have to. And very soon, when we touch Tinker on the side, it's the lightest touch, and she steps forwards, and she's pretty calm. She's pretty calm all the time. She's not worried about it. So that's a whistle stop tour. You should probably look more into it. I know Mary's doing a DVD on the whole sort of Andrew McLean method, and along with Ali Wakelin, but that's kind of like way out in the distance. Have a look onto the website. I will email that to everybody. So let's have a quick talk about the seat, because I did say we'd have a discussion about the influence of the seat on the horse. I really don't... I'm going to say something really weird. I don't use my seat. I don't use it. I don't push with it or shove with it or wiggle with it or anything like that. But let's just sort of have a look at how I could use my seat, since I don't know of any other term to describe it. So there's a couple of links up here for you to watch, and for those that are in the chat, I can paste those links in. Some of you may have seen these already, actually. They're both Mary's. So the first one is a really interesting video about how to sit still, how your seat bone should move on the horse, and how you can learn to mold onto the horse's back and really begin, especially in walk, to get what I call seat bone control, where you're walking the horse and the horse isn't walking you. I think I mentioned earlier, if you're sitting too loosely in the saddle, then whatever speed the horse decides to walk at, your butt goes at, and if you want it to go any differently, you have to use the reins. But there is a kind of a more subtle way that you can control the horse using your seat. I hate that phrase. Anyway, it's difficult not to use it. And the second link is to a video in which Mary talks about how to use your rising trot to control tempo and the speed that the horse goes at. I'd like to do a few examples, and if hopefully you're sitting down right now, so if you can kind of like sit down with a straight back and your feet on the floor. Here's an interesting test. I've heard that some people do you know what? I was having a conversation with Mary yesterday where I was saying to her, you know what, I feel really naive about some of the ways that other people teach. And when I hear things, I go, do people really do that? And Mary's kind of like, yeah. So one of the things that I know some people teach is to push, as a weight aid, is to push into the stirrup. So hopefully if you've got your seat bones on the chair, your knees out in front of you, your feet on the floor, I want you to try a little experiment. I want you to push into your right foot. And I want you to notice what that kind of does to your body. You can tell me on chat if you like, but I'll describe what happens to me when I do that. When I push down into my right foot, my right seat bone lifts up off that. I have a really hard job not moving my shoulders to the right and collapsing in the waist on the right. So I cannot see any good from that. That is you need to be very, very careful what the consequences are of the things that you do to what happens to your seat, because it's very easy to start influencing that kind of thing. The second thing is the kind of like the inverse of pushing into your stirrup that I've heard being explained to people, is to weight one seat bone more. So let's look at the inverse of that. We'll use the right seat bone again, unless you feel comfortable on your left. But push down on your right seat bone. So if you weight your right seat bone and kind of push it down, I find it pops my left seat bone off, my left shoulder goes down, and I kind of bulge off to the right a bit. So has anyone can anyone feel that in the chat from what I'm describing? Other people will have their own contortions, but that's kind of generally what happens to me when I try and push on my right seat bone. And creating a weight aid with your seat, none of those kind of things really work. And we'll be going, when I release that ebook, that's what we'll be going into a lot more. We certainly can't kind of cover it here. Sitting still is extremely important. I mean, there's so they don't work independently. Oh, you mean weight aids don't work independently of the seat? No, I don't think they do. I think your weight aid is a consequence of putting your seat in the right place. When you do half pass across the arena, you're using your weight, but not because you're using your weight, but because you're putting your body in the right place for half pass, and your weight comes into effect, and the horse steps underneath your weight, and your outside leg is pushing it across the arena, encouraging the horse to continue to step under your weight. But there's no massive throw of weight. You're not moving your body over to the, you're not bending your body over to the right, you're not leaning over to the right, your chin doesn't come off that central axis. You remain straight in your spine. So yeah, I find it difficult to sort of think of. I don't teach weight aids. It doesn't enter my mind. I just teach the person how to put their body in the right place. Yeah, exactly, to be balanced. What else have we got? So sitting still is really important, not to move more than the horse moves you. If we get in the car and the car accelerates, we don't have to shove our seat forward to stay up with it. The same, when you sit on the horse, sit still. Don't push and shove any more than the horse actually moves you. The other thing I've talked about is matching the forces. Now, I've seen it happen. I've seen people do medium trot in sitting trot, and they lean back, which isn't necessarily bad, but then they sort of drive forward and down with their seat to drive the horse sort of forwards. But in actual fact, to going into medium trot, you don't need to drive with your seat like that. You just to make sure that your body matches the forces of the horse. In other words, this is a way that could be described as using your seat, for instance. So as the horse accelerates, you're thinking of increasing the push from the back of your body up to the front of the body, and the front of your body up to your hands. And you're actually increasing the muscle tone in your body to keep matching the forces generated by the horse. Otherwise, you'll be doing what happens when you accelerate in the car. Your body gets pushed back into the chair, you're behind the movement, and you have to hang on to the steering wheel, just to, I don't know, you end up like hanging onto the steering wheel and your body's been pinned backwards. The same thing can happen, and I've seen it even with reasonable riders doing medium and extended trot, that they're taking a good pull on the rein, the horse is short in the neck, and they're behind the movement, essentially, because they're not providing enough tone to stay up with the horse. This is actually quite long. I hope we're going to get to the end. The pendulum effect is what I want to talk about, is when riders put too much weight into their stirrups. For jumping, please, for the love of God, put weight in your stirrups. You've got to have your heel down. You've got to be, you've got to have weight into your feet. You need to be anchored. You need to be, but and actually what happens is, even though your legs are forwards, when you go over a jump and you go into the jumping position, you're now balanced over your feet. So it works great. In dressage, we do not want that happening. We don't want any weight in the foot other than what's required to keep the stirrup on the ball of your foot. The reason for this is, you could try this now. I mean, it works great guns for me because I'm sat on one of these fancy Wisley chairs with wheels and all that kind of stuff. But if I put my feet on the ground and I push my heels down, well, my chair goes backwards and my leg swings forwards and I start tipping forwards a bit. So the same thing kind of happens on the horse. You push on your stirrups, your leg swings forwards and your bum goes further backwards in the saddle and you probably end up tipping forward a bit. So and the pendulum effect is what I'm talking about, is the pendulum effect of the stirrups. You push your foot into the stirrups and that leather and stirrup will swing forwards and make that happen. Newton's third law states each action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you're going to push down in your stirrups, it's going to push your bum up out of the saddle and backwards. In fact, pushing into the stirrups is the opposite of sitting deep. And that actually kind of continues into what Mary coined the water ski motorboat situation, and the fact that the more your leg swings forward, the more your bum goes backwards, the more you end up hanging onto the reins, the more the horse becomes the motorboat and kind of speeds out off from underneath you. Woo! That was a quick run through. Okay. And actually just a couple of little pictures here of a rider that isn't pushing into their stirrups, where the foot is just light on the end here. This is Heather Blitz, who's a American Grand Prix rider. She was reserve on the Olympic team and is doing really well at the moment. And you can see she's just balanced over her feet, not reliant upon the reins, and matching the forces of the horse. And this is Amelia again, just sort of in alignment, foot light, and balance over her feet. So, just a quick statement of what I've got coming up over the next few weeks, which will be of interest. So I'm filming the director's cut for the new Kindle book, which is called Master Dressage: The Basics. This weekend, I'm doing some filming for the DVD. You may have seen that on pre-order. So I'll put a little bit of that up on Facebook, on YouTube. But I'm going to put a fairly big chunk of that into the members area that I'm setting up for everyone who's pre-ordered. So they'll actually be able to see the DVD being, built up over the time, ready for release end of July. And Mary's new webinar series starts on Tuesday, which is going to be brilliant. She had a huge number of people join up for the On the Bit webinars, and the same is going to be the same for the other webinar series. And finally, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask from what I've ran through? I appreciate there was a lot here, but if anyone would like to ask me any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Apologies if it all seemed a bit rushed, actually. Thank you very much, Robin. As always, I will make all of these slides available in the members area along with the recording that I've just done. I always record the audio to a separate high quality feed in case there's a problem with the audio on the recording. So either way, we'll make sure that the audio is decent. Okay, no questions. We had a slightly early start. So thank you very much for turning up. I really appreciate it. I know how much time it is out of your day and how much trust and enjoyment you must have had out of the book to spend an hour of your time doing this. Let your friends know about Master Dressage. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to leave a review on Amazon.com. And in the meantime, have fun mastering dressage. Thank you very much, everybody.